Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drevenstead, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest on episode 50 is Dave Scott, who completed a solo journey on the TransAmerica Trail. This is part 3 of a 3-part interview, and believe it or not, we finally bring you the conclusion to Scott's adventure. We spoke to Scott in episodes 46 and 48, where he told us about the challenges of preparing for and riding the TransAmerica Trail during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, dealing with hurricanes and Mississippi mud, and then crashing on Imogene Pass in Colorado, where he broke his leg. Scott spent the winter and spring healing up, and in the summer of 2021, he returned to the TransAmerica Trail. After conquering Imogene Pass, he rode through Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and Oregon, where he finally made it to the end of the trail and dipped his tires in the Pacific Ocean. This is another unfiltered, uncensored conversation about the trials and tribulations of riding solo across America on a dirt bike. Look for part 1 of Scott's story in the adventure-themed November 2022 issue of Rider, and part 2 of his story will be published in early 2023. Thanks for listening and enjoy the episode. Hey, Dave, welcome back.
Thanks, Greg. Always good to talk to you, man. Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, that's just around the corner. Actually, it's tomorrow when we're recording this on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So, hey, people who have listened to episode 46 and then episode 48 of the podcast, were the first 2 installments of our conversation with Dave Scott about his adventures and occasional misadventures on the TransAmerica Trail. He rode a KTM 500 EXC-F across America on a dirt bike. And so we left off at the end of episode 48, roughly, with David made it all the way across to Colorado, and then was going up to off-road trail up to Imogene Pass near Ouray. And had an unfortunate mishap where he fell off his bike and broke his leg. So it brought his first leg of his trip to an abrupt end. So Dave, you were able to basically, you had to leave the trail, you had to get surgery, you had a pretty bad fracture, you had to go back home to Louisiana and convalesce. So you did this, you were on the trail the first time in the summer of 2020. So basically summer into late fall of 2020. So basically the end of 2020 and early 2021, you were back home nursing a broken leg.
Yeah, it was a pretty gnarly one. It was a tabular fracture of the tibia and fibia. So basically it's like straight down kind of a smashy thing. And so I had it look like a door hinge. It went from my femur and kind of, straight across the top of it and then down the side. And I had 20 or 30 screws. It was kind of a thing. Anyway, so God, that required 2 months non-weight bearing. So walking around in one of those little old lady walker things with the tennis balls on it in the house, and then crutches and then cane and etc. So yeah, it took a good, until that summer almost where, and as it was, I was actually kind of nervous because even on the fateful day that I had planned to retake this thing, I still had a little bit of a limp. I didn't notice it, but other people would say, "Hey man, what you got that for?" And I called it the Louisiana swagger. Anyway, so that was kind of a thing. But on the positive side of the ledger, and arguably now, I mean, Humpty Dumpty, I'm a 58-year-old man. So when you start breaking shit like that, you never 100% come back. But it is what it is. So anyway, blah blah. But during that interregnum, I had a lot of time to think about stuff, and especially in the hospital bed and laying around looking at the ceiling part. And so I kind of rethought the whole task, And part of it too was, the COVID was on again, then off again, then kind of on again, and all that weird. All of us that went through that stuff and still kind of going on, I guess. But so it just so happened that a good buddy of mine that I knew from camping and regional Burning Man events kind of stuff was this guy named Nathan that lived up in Philadelphia. And the timing was good for him because he was kind of between situations or something. And so, so basically now to get into the tap part of it was, it's kind of a cool double story. So I did it solo, unassisted with all my luggage, camping and cooking along the way. And then the second time I kind of did it like Rancho Relaxo style with glamping, is that I had my buddy kind of track me in my Jeep. I've got an old Jeep Wrangler TJ, and then I've got this pop-up trailer that's really a badass piece of gear. I don't know, I'm not shilling for him on your thing though, but it's made by a company called Sylvan Sport, and the name of the trailer is called Go, G-O, exclamation point. And it's neat because it's kind of like a little Swiss Army trailer. it's light as hell that one person can just grab it and push it around. But it could be a stake bed trailer. It could be it kind of lifts up, and so you can put motorcycles. I hauled 2 motorcycles when I moved from DC back to New Orleans, my Victory and that KTM dirt bike, the one I gave to Rick, the 640 that I had. And then you can stack canoes and mountain bikes on the top. But then when it turns into a tent, I'm 6'3", and I can stand up in the middle of it. And there's 2 large beds on either side and like a table. Anyway, blah, blah. So basically I could do the rest of the tat just on that little skinny dirt bike. Yeah. I kept water. I kept my little, like a little survival bag if I crapped out and had to spend the night. So I had like something to sleep in, a little bivvy bag, and a couple of spares, like a clutch cable and shit that I needed. So I still had a bag. You still can't get rid of that, but not like, 50 pounds of, cross country, 3 months travel shit.
Yeah, you basically just had what you needed for the day, and you could have like your camping gear and all the heavy stuff on the trailer with your buddy in the Jeep. So that's
real spares and real tools. It
was like you're running the car and you had a support team. So you
yes, it was super badass. And the badassness turns into italics is when I would roar into camp. My buddy was really good about this. He would end up going to a supermarket or something in the little towns, and so we would always, or as much as we could, he'd have local beer, and I'm a Pilsner and lager guy, so we even had it dialed in, and so I'd have like the local Pilsner, and literally we kind of went all out on the food budget. So it was nice. Like T-bones and pork chops the size of your face, and again, local farm to market products. He had some magical powers. Is that he's a little bit younger guy than me. I think he's like 31 or 2 or 30 nothing or whatever. And so he can find crap on the internet like right away. And there's tons of web rings that he knows about. And so there's evidently some kind of a pseudo Airbnb thing for campers. And it's just random ranchers and wineries and stuff all around America.
I think it's called Hip Camp.
Dial in and camp, and some are free and some are.
So, I think it's called Hip Camp. It's a website where, people that have private land will like allow people to come like pitch a tent or something, and they charge whatever they charge for it. But you can, when campgrounds are full and all that kind of stuff, you can get some pretty cool space. So I've had some friends have used it. Yeah.
And he was the savvy. And so that was another one that because before, 9/10 of this stuff, I know it's boring to your list, is kind of like logistics. And once you dial in all of that shit, and hence like what you just did, I've never done it myself. And in the early days, I would scoff, because I could do anything myself or whatever. But I get like those pay to ride things where you can fly to Switzerland and then just enjoy the shit out of all the trails and don't have to worry about customs and immigration and where the fuck you're going to stay and all of that. And that's a lot. Like I said, half these conversations are about all the little MacGyvering, which I actually found entertaining. But that was something I was going to keep doing. I mean, all these little, so it was a joy. I didn't have to carry anything. I ate like a king. My buddy, and we had similar tastes and stuff, like, because I met him camping. He was a camping master. Because that's another one. Sometimes you need to camp with people, you're kind of carrying them. You got to drag them around and, boost them up, enthusiasm. Is this fun, and all of that. But in this case, this dude found great camping spots that like I couldn't have found myself, had good food, and was a good camp cook. Everything was just so dialed. So all I had to do was ride. So even though I was a little cripple and fair enough, kind of gun shy. Oh, and to really get into the tat part, which the story or whatever I tried is that like, I'm kind of dumb. Like, I think we talked about this the last time, was that, if I just wanted to complete the tat, which I did, and I really wanted to do it in one. So there was a part of me that said, oh, why bother? Like I couldn't do it, or I was going to start again from Cape Hatteras and do it all over again. And I mean, that's kind of extreme, but I really seriously considered it for like almost a month. But I was recuperating. He's like, nope. Hello?
Yo, I'm still here.
Okay, so your picture went out.
I just it's better for the internet connection if I pull.
Oh, okay.
Your video's off, and so that way, we had some interruptions last time, so it's all good. Sorry, didn't mean to.
Yeah. Oh, that's all. I just look because there's been a couple of times where I've been rambling at this.
No,
I look over and I've been talking to the cat.
I understand. It's all good. Yeah, the video is what really hogs up the internet bandwidth. So anyway, sorry,
okay, all good.
I didn't even throw off your flow.
No, it's all good. So anyway, blah blah. So what was I saying? Oh, so starting. So like what I actively considered was starting all over again from Cape Hatteras or somewhere on the coast and kind of doing that. And then I thought, because it was such an ass pay to coordinate the truck and the thing. And I was like, I couldn't have anyone to haul it over there for me. And so then I thought, well, no, I'll just join it from the Mississippi tat maybe, and I could just ride over there. And then, but then I just thought, I've already done all those things, and you kind of don't,
Yeah.
And so what I probably should have done was just start in Oregon and then drive to Telluride, and finish it there. And then I had friends in Colorado and cousins and stuff. So, no, but I decided
but your bike was
HD.
Hang on one second. So, but once you had to come off the trail when you broke your leg, you had your bike stored in Colorado, so it was already there.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So it made sense. Like you wouldn't have to ship your bike anywhere if you restarted in Colorado, roughly where you left off. Okay.
But what that meant, kind of where I was getting at, is all the other possible options and permutations. But I started at the deep end. I mean, quite literally. Even now in retrospect, and not just because I broke my leg, if I would have made it or whatever, is the single hardest day and the single gnarliest trails are right there in that little Colorado Lake District or whatever they call it there. And it's that damn road across Imogene Pass. And so, and of course, I mean, I kind of knew it, but I just thought, I'm just going to front load it. I'm going to get over all my fears. I'm going to do the hardest thing in the beginning that I loathe and I'm most afraid of. And then it won't be hanging over my head. And then I'll go. And then also, since it's like arguably one of the highest roads in the continent, is that literally it'll be all downhill from here. That like there'll be nothing higher and nothing more gnarly.
Yeah.
And that's how that was. And so I'm doing it. And like you'd said, it's like it just makes sense. I'm there and I'm a completist. That's like the main thing and blah. Well, fair enough, so we went down. Oh, but the other thing too is that amazing gal Dana Withers who has pause for the, if anyone other than my cat and you who listen to, I finally got around to listening to those other podcasts, and I apologize to humanity for the rambling particularly the second one I was somewhat poor form. I think we talked about everything but motorcycling in the text. But
I was trying to move that conversation along, but you weren't having it.
I was insistent, man. I needed to get drilled down into hurricanes and how they're formed or whatever. but the other thing was consistently, when I listened to it and I winced every time, is a magnificent Dana Withers lives in has a house in Grand Junction. And consistently, I said Colorado Springs every time.
Oh,
so
Colorado Springs is pretty far away.
People in Moab from fucking Colorado Springs,
Colorado Springs on the other side of the Front Range. Grand Junction's not that far. It's not that far. Well, it's just a little farther north. I understand. Yeah.
So anyway, anyone that cares, would ever want to go back and listen to the podcast, is don't listen to any of the towns that I say and just think about Grand Junction. So anyway, thank you for that.
Map not to scale. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, so Dana, and that was a gal that, she had this great weekend planned, and I was going to show up like this knight in shining armor, having to, coming out of Moab and then seeing her and then coming. So I called her and said, hey, I'm in the hospital. I'm not going to see you this weekend. And so it's like 3 hours or something. So she drove all the way down to Montrose, picked my broken ass out of the emergency thing, hauled me back. I couldn't get up the stairs to her thing because I was not in weight bearing. I was broken. And anyway, blah, blah. So, and she's got a business and running shit. So I convalesced there for a few weeks and blah. And then the bike, another long story, which this time I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it would be a good talk, you and me one day over beers, is how do you get a motorcycle out of a 13,000 foot pass in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah.
From a hospital bed with no real cell phone reception. So that was another interesting life story to recover all my shit. But really amazing humans were around every time. And it's easy for people to get cynical, but most people are really good. And some people are just great. And I've been blessed to encounter many people. So a lot of very cool humans were part of it. And so this other guy that blah, blah, blah ended up delivering the bike to Dana's, but she wasn't home because she was working, and I was medevacing to Louisiana, and then left it kind of in this little shed thing that she had worked out. And then so that bike sat there cryogenically frozen, probably was frozen for 6 months out of the year. Exactly how it was, with exactly the gas that was in there and exactly the map in my tank bag, folded over to how it was, and dirty underwear and the panniers. It it was my bike sitting there for a year. So that was kind of another thing, was I wasn't really, and again, talking about logistics is, in the great quit or the post COVID and the supply chain, meow. Plus, we'd also talked ad nauseum about, and also about that camping thing, is that Telluride and Moab are two places that you can't ever camp anywhere, and you got to have reservations. You just cannot show the fuck up. And I am the king of guerrilla camping. I've camped in abandoned buildings, in people's backyards, all kinds of stuff. But that's one that you kind of got to do the work, and you got to pay the money, and you got to reserve something. And even in the weird seasons, those are just tiny places that are just full of lovers of the outdoors, because these places are inarguably some of the greatest places on the face of the earth. They really are. Yes, they're crowded. Yes, they're blah, blah. But oh my God, there's really, and I've been in every single continent except Antarctica and had driver's license in most of them. But you get what you pay for and everything. So what I didn't think about though was in the peak of summer or the tail end of summer.
Yeah. But
September is really a popular season because the weather, it's the driest time of the year ever. And plus those places have been dry because of the El Nino or whatever. But I couldn't get a mechanic. And I kind of called in advance, sort of from Louisiana when I started the trip, and said, okay, I'm going to reserve this, because you can't even here. You can't just show up, to Joey's garage or whatever. God. So that was and I couldn't just ride, you know what I mean? And that thing kind of needed to, but anyway, I found some awesome people in Montrose. And then that was another huge thing. And they set up the bike. And then the first dirt road we hit was that, I think it's called Last Dollar Road. Mm-hmm. That's a magnificent road. That's one that people, even if you had a mild 4-wheel drive, but there's some tricky bits in there, but it was a good, welcome back to the bike. Welcome. Oh, and the first time ever really driving out there in those conditions where it was just me and the bike. Yeah. It was badass. And it was one of the few parts on the Tat where Nathan was on the dirt road with me in the trailer, although I would go ahead and then sometimes I'd wait for him for a picture or something like that. And, so for Nathan, it was one of the high points of the trip was the first day. And it was the first time, and it was a checkout for him because, my Jeep is, it's tricked out. It's got a lift kit. It's got old man Emu. It's got all kinds of cool stuff on it, but it's a right-hand drive Jeep.
Oh, right. You bought it in Africa and had it.
I had it when I was in Tanzania. It still has Tanzanian plates on the front of it. So that was also a trick for him. So I got to be squared with the gear. He got to be squared with his gear. And to me, that was also one of the more important. We bonded. It was fun as hell. The weather was great. It's so beautiful. And then it so happened is that when we dropped into Telluride, and it turns out, no wonder why it was such a bitch and extremely expensive. It was like all the other lodging and motels and camping combined, didn't quite match whatever the hell I paid for that ridiculous place. But it was right at the peak of the Telluride Mushroom Festival. Oh, so it was awesome. So we rolled into town and people are walking around in big, like mushroom costumes, and people were tripping balls, and there was all kinds of crunchy academic people like Indiana Jones with like magnifying glasses looking under trees and shit. And that was awesome. So that was kind of the backdrop too of welcome to the Tat, man, so that was pretty neat. And then I think I talked a little bit last time, but the story details a lot of it too, I guess in the next issue or whenever the thing goes. But it was kind of a bad idea. And of course I was already committed and driving up that damn Imogene when I realized, like, what the hell am I doing? I mean, I was still trying to, I had that good ride the day earlier, but I mean, it was a couple-hour ride.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was what it was. I finished the damn thing, came back to the Mushroom Festival. We just had a full day there, and I kind of blew out the carburetors and and then we started. Then the first real day of like the new Tat and coming out of there, we got you can get them. They're like $250 a piece, and then you have to have this like Garmin plan. But there's these little clip on your D-ring, kind of like cell phone satellite things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever used them, but it was kind of essential for us. But I must say, a little wag the finger at Garmin is that, it's the only one that does what it does, and I'm using their name, and I did it, and I still have them, and I'll have to use them again because they kind of have a monopoly on that little niche. But Remember when, like, before iPhones just took over the whole thing, there was those Palm Pilots for a while.
Yeah.
But that has a whole different algorithm and language, and so too these damn sat phones. They have a weird way, and their little Garmin. Like I said, you try to spread the screen, and instead you're putting down points. It's like the buttons don't do what you think they do, and so it's really not intuitive. And that first day was a fairly easy day in terms of tatness. I mean, the trail was pretty perfunctory. I took a GPS Kevin's to join Sam's because the way I was in Telluride, and Sam's had bypassed the whole thing that crippled me and went down the $1 Million Highway, a paved road. And so the whole Lake District on Sam's is pretty much a paved road. And hence why I was trying to stay as dirt as I could. And so I went BDR and local, and then coming out of Telluride, I popped into Kevin's Stat Trail. And then right in early Utah, I picked up Sam's. It would have been like his third day because he goes way low. Anyway, blah, blah. So that first day was a little bit of stitching together two trails I didn't normally join, but it was pretty easy. But we had this artificial goal that there was this town called Stoner, Colorado. And we just thought that was hilarious. And we thought, oh man, we got to have lunch and do a selfie in front of like Stoner, Colorado, and we looked on the map and again, those GPS Kevin kind of bigger maps compared to Sam Carrero's really suck. His strength and why you even care about Kevin is he was the first electronic and the little chip, and you could just follow the dotted line on your Garmin and not really have to navigate. That's what Kevin is. But the actual little mappy shit is just kind of a placebo map. And so that's what I loaded Nathan with. So Nathan could kind of watch where I was because he wasn't following. Other than that $1 Million Mile, that was like the only time in the TAD, or one of the few times where he and I shared the same trail. Mostly he was on a highway map, reconnoitering campgrounds or establishing campgrounds, and then buying fuel. And then why not? If he had a good day, go hiking and enjoy his vacation too, So that those little Garmin sat things was super useful to. We set up a system. Well, I learned from the Army, and as a young lieutenant, was like called phase lines, like phase line Alpha, phase line Bravo, or whatever. And you'd do these arbitrary things that would be mostly highways that he could see on the map, or like intersections or little towns or something.
Right.
And so it would be like, okay, and because on these they reminded me also of, on the one hand, like Palm Pilots, how they have a total different working system. But remember now we're old people, is that before cell phones, and they had those lunchbox car phones, they had those little beeper things. Yeah. And the beepers, they were just, the early ones had the red letter LED ones, and it just had somebody's phone number. You didn't know who the fuck it was. And then you'd have to leave the party or the restaurant and then go call on a payphone. And then the second generation just had these little fledgling messages, that you could barely intelligible, like call me ASAP mom or something like that, and,
right.
And so that's about where these sat phones are. And then it uses your existing phone. And so you don't even read it on the sat phone. You got to like it's really a pain in the end. And a motorcycle, that means you got to stop, take your fucking gloves off, and, and then, but it gives you signals no matter what in the middle of nowhere. And so to get both of us to the stupid town of Stoner turned into like way more time than we needed. It was extremely frustrating. And of course, I was still in the completist mode where I got to start the tent exactly where I was. And I got to do all of these, things. And then, and so God, it took half the day. And it turns out Stoner wasn't even a town. It's like, I don't know what it's doing on the map. It's like a little RV resort, but not even with campers, but people like half living there. And there's some like desultory trailers, and there's like a little fish camp. And then there's not even a gas station, and there's not even really
a sign you could take a photo with.
Yeah, there was a sign, but it wasn't even. I mean, so but the main thing, and now I'll move on because not much of a story, but like the sort of seminal things was, excuse me, was that 1 Million Mile last dollar road that got us melded together as a team. And got us both kind of operating our vehicles and understanding what we needed to do and pacing and get us excited about this badass trip that we're going to embark on. And then, okay, I'm still trying to process whatever that Imogene Pass thing was about. But I did it, and at least I closed the door on that demon that I could do it, or whatever. But it was kind of superfluous for the trip or for any reason. And it was horrible and frightening and beautiful and all of those things. And then finally is this dumb story I told, but the comms. And it turned out that those the communication-y thing. We never really had to use it, but God, it really made a difference of that. Like, hey, how do I find my buddy camping?
Yeah,
Because
right.
we didn't always have what we would discuss like the night before. And that's kind of a fun thing to do in the TAD is, with your headlamp or whatever, and you kind of review the day tomorrow and what preps and thoughts you might have to think about or sleep on, or options in the trail as much as you can. And with him, he would be next to me and he'd look at the road map and see where, where we might camp, etc. Around Moab, we had a state campground that wasn't really near Moab. And in fact, there was some options in the trail. And so someday in life, I want to go back to the actual national park and that main focus area where most people go. But I stayed kind of on the
When you
east
say
of it.
national park, you mean like Canyonlands?
Yes,
Yeah, you go
Canyonlands.
through Canyonlands. So hey, so my understanding, because I've never ridden any of the TAT or backcountry discovery routes, but I've heard the Utah BDR where it goes through the Moab area is pretty dicey, especially in the LaSalle Mountains area.
Oh, Jesus.
Did you stick to all
Yes.
of that stuff and get through Utah?
Oh God, yeah. So here's Mr. So kind of another driving thing for me was, and by choosing that KTM, again, all logistics, it all goes down to the long tail of logistics ultimately, is that I got it because I was thinking about getting a 250. And we talked ad nauseum about my choices. I got a light bike that I could pick up and throw around and fall off of and get back on it, etc. But the negative part is it has a pinchy little, dirt bike tank. And so I bought one of those Acer Beast ones, but
Yeah.
even that one, and it's shaped weird. So it looks like a bigger tank than it is because of the air cleaner and all of that stuff on it. But
Right.
I still was getting like a 180 range,
Okay.
and some of those parts in the Great Basin, southern and western Utah, and half of Oregon, and a big chunk of Idaho. It's, next to the Sahara, it's one of the biggest, emptiest spaces in North America,
Yeah.
I mean, other than the Canadian tundra shit. And frankly, I was worried about the range. And also being alone, that's some, even in those mountain places, there's enough people playing up there in the summertime that's, also it was the beginning of hunting season.
Yeah.
And whatever people think about hunting is thank God for those hunters for me, because there was times where I rarely saw the hunters, but you could see their camps and stuff. And I thought, well, I could crawl over here if I needed to, or,
Right.
those, most hunters, those kind of guys up there hunting elk and like way in the high country are pretty resilient guys too, that had generators, first aid kits, and were knowledgeable of the area. So, I was grateful. So there were humans, but in these other Great Basin, where they have Burning Man and stuff, I mean, there's nobody out there.
So you had a larger tank, you had 180-mile range, but you didn't have like an auxiliary fuel bottle or fuel canister
yes, that was going to be an option. And indeed, I bought one to take with me. But my point being back about the BCDR and maps was I kind of didn't want to put myself in that situation anyway.
Right. Okay.
And as much as I hated the rocks and the cliffs, but driving in sand is also its own hell. You know what I mean? And I, at the very beginning of the trip in the Outer Banks, I rode on the beach for a while, and it was fun for like the first 15 minutes, and then it's very exhausting and difficult. And then when the sand gets soft or wet or whatever, and then later on in Oklahoma, on purpose, I stopped off at that little county or state park, and I rode the dunes there just to sort of practice. And I was kind of like, yeah. So stupidly, to go back to the BCDR, the backcountry discovery route is, wow. So I found once I got off just Sam Carrero's tats and I started mixing and matching the maps, and later on, we'll talk about, I went on the real Oregon Trail. I went on Santa Fe Trail. I went on the Trail of Tears. I was trying to do in fact, that's kind of where my emphasis, I wanted to do the flow of where our forefathers traveled cross country. And then also the season I was traveling in would have been the season that they had traveled. And then, I had some Willa Cather books and stuff like that I could read simultaneously and kind of really feel what they were doing. And anyway, blah, blah. So here was this BCDR, and it went straight up the eastern ridge of Utah from top to bottom, but just hugged that area. And I said, oh, that's fucking perfect. And then it joined, because then Sam he sort of since has been playing with new trails up there in Montana and Idaho. And then there's all this new Sam's World that he created up there. And then he calls it it's Pacific Ocean Sector or Spur. He calls it, but POS is on all the maps. and it stands for pizza. I've always put POSs on DX equipment or whatever,
Yeah.
you know? So I kind of hated that all my maps were stamped piece of shit on there, but and it wasn't arguably one of the best parts of the whole tap. But so yes, so I thought, yes, I'm all about this BCDR. Thank you guys for doing this route that actually goes in a direction and where I want to go. Well, I was praying and hoping that I could have something as easy as the Imogene Pass.
Yeah. Right.
You know? And then I felt kind of cheated because I thought, man, I thought it was going to be one and done. You know, I was going to
Yeah.
front load the pain and build all this karma, and it's all downhill from there.
Yeah.
But no, man, it was brutal.
Yeah.
That was
I've heard
oh,
Utah's pretty gnarly, man. Yeah, I mean, because I know people that they, you know, some of these people do these backcountry discovery routes on GSs and stuff. I mean, you were smart. You were on a light bike because, I mean, the saying is like nobody out on an off-road ride will ever regret being on a lighter bike. Like, you know, it's like the heavier it is, you know, so even a middleweight GS is 500 pounds. You get a GS with all the panniers and camping equipment stuff, and you can be well over 600 pounds. I mean, that's twice the weight of your bike plus any gear you had on it. So it's like,
oh yeah,
yeah. So,
and
yeah.
it's like, you know, wilderness canoeing or something. There's parts where kind of with a motorcycle, you sort of have to semi-portage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know, oh yes, you're absolutely. In fact, in the little story, I think I have a paragraph on trying to make people visualize what we're talking about, like what it physically feels like to basically pummel down. There's this probably the nadir of the entire experience as much as breaking. Because the irony of, and you can saw from the story, is like when I broke my leg, I owned it. I nailed it. I was summiting. The sign was in front of me, and it was a mechanical failure of the machine. I mean, I didn't even do anything with my wrist and the throttle. You know what I mean? It just sputtered because I was reaching a new atmosphere, and the little chip couldn't figure it out. I don't know what the fuck happened, but the air, you know, fuel ratio or something, but it sputtered out and I slid backwards with power. I mean, anyone that's done hill climbs and shit knows that you're at the limits of your machine when you're, or like I just went to the air show in Pensacola, but these planes that go straight up and then stall. That's basically what happened. Yeah. I was going like straight up on the motorcycle, fully loaded with my 200-pound carcass, you know, but, and then it happened, but I was in control. I knew what was going on. In this place that we're talking about, there was this crevasse funnel thing that looked like a dried waterfall that was literally bowling balls. There was no road. There was a cliff. There was the shale scree crap above, but it was like a trough, like a bobsled run that was completely paved in bowling balls. Yeah. So like, how do you even do that? You know, like what, you know, I literally shut the machine off. I was like at the edge of the little, like one of those bungee jump moments, or that, you know, jumping out of a plane, you're like standing there at the doorway and it's like all or nothing, man. You know, here's this thing. Yeah, I could imagine being on a big GS whatever, or, you know, Verses, Ulysses, or these, oh God. Yeah. But anyway, that one was, that was probably the single hardest, roughest. And again, it was one of those, okay, just turn around and get off and not take another route. No. Where I was I snookered myself. There was no going back. You're committed. You know, there was some, and that's one of the, I don't even know how to, the skill. You kind of almost need to be a trials rider on that. It was short. It was probably, you know, a football field long, but you know, one rock kills you. You don't need a whole. I mean,
it's like those hard enduro things, like the Erzberg Rodeo and Romaniacs and all those other ones. It's like the guys that always win those things are trials riders, because they can just sit there and bounce off the rocks and launch and do different things. And that's not something even a reasonably skilled dirt rider would typically be able to do. And like I said, you've got gear and you're trying to make sure you survive the day and get to campsite and keep going. And so you can't afford another breakdown or another injury if you're going to finish the trail. So you've got to be cautious. And so, yeah, man, that's got to be sketchy.
Yes, very much so. And conditions, you know, other people might listen to this and say, oh, I'm going there exactly. And then they could write back and say, man, I was on that trail and I didn't see no bowling ball canyon. But again, because it also changes. You know, you can't blame, because I was at the time I was cursing, like, not God, because he's perfect and created the way it was, but BCDR. Like, what kind of jackass thought that I'm going to make this a road and I'm going to put it on a map and sell it for $15 to half the world and have a bunch of assholes hurt themselves on this? Like, who would knowingly do that? But the thing is trail conditions change.
Right.
You know,
Well, and
all I know, there could have
and
been a
some of
big
those
snow
trails
melt
have
2 years earlier, flooded it. Sometimes in the that's why also when you buy any of these maps or go on any of the, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this, tap your foot if you're a teacher. This will be on the test. Go online and try to like check it out, because whenever that shit was published or went to post or got, whatever is, conditions change, and
well,
for all I know, that was a perfect road. And then there was some weird flash flood.
Yeah,
but then
exactly.
also like 2 years from now, another flash flood will put all kinds of soil down there, or someone will come in there and pave it, or someone will build some $10 million chalet up there and then bring in power lines and they'll cut a new road or something, like there's sometimes that shit gets closed. And you'll see throughout my story, and anyone that does it, 100% for sure, at least once or twice, you'll have to do a workaround because
it's not an open highway. I mean, it's a backcountry route, so it's subject to changing conditions. Like, so hey, a quick question. So, because you had Sam Carrero's TransAmerica Trail maps, you had GPS Kevin routes, you had backcountry discovery routes. So I know with the BDR stuff, they typically,
and then state stuff. Then I had stuff,
and you also had state stuff. So I know that like when there's the particularly gnarly technical sections, my understanding is the backcountry discovery routes often have alternate, like easier routes or less challenging routes.
Yes.
So I guess that's one of those things, that sometimes maybe you get committed to a route before you know how bad it's going to be, but oftentimes there are alternate ways to go around the really gnarly stuff.
This is true. This is a very true statement. And so throughout, and hence the night before, throughout that time, you're looking at where it's going, stuff, like I said, because half of me too was looking at historical stuff. I love caves. If there was any cave, I would deviate somewhat. Like there was always little stuff. So sometimes you're like, well, and then I lie to myself. God, I'm the best that ever was on like convincing myself that I'm way more awesome than I am, kind of shit. And then, there was like, well, God, I just went through Bowling Ball Canyon yesterday, and this one is only 2 miles long and it's a little bit red, but God,
Yeah. Classic.
And then also it's a little bit arbitrary. Like you said, something that was red, like that was also early on when I was around, I forget, where you just kind of peek into that amazing, I sent you one of those pictures of it with all the typical Southwest. You just kind of skirt this in a Escalante or something.
Yeah, Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Yeah,
yes.
That's like between Zion and Bryce, right there in the middle.
Yes, kind of in the south. In the very beginning, there was sort of a gnarly route, and that's when I was still of the view that it's all downhill from here, and nothing will ever be worse than Imogene, because I hadn't really been bloodied yet, on this version of the TAT. Yeah. And that was the first of the little red lines or blue lines or black, like one of the one of the gnarlier ones. And it wasn't that bad to me at that time. But again, it could have been one of those, when they laid it out, it was one of these, well, shit, should we put this on here or not? It's pretty rough. And, so you never know. So, but that also messed me up. So when I got to Moab and beyond, I thought, well, shit, I've already done one of their red diamond ones or whatever. So I can do this. But then when you're committed on the trail, like I said, then you're committed, and then that's how you're going to be, And then other times, just the regular BCDR and just the regular Sam, because we're making it sound like, if there was a scale, that Sam Carrero's is the pussy one, and then the BCDR is the heavy one. But that's not true either. No. All of them follow paved roads on occasion, and all of them. And Sam has some gnarly, that War Loop Road in Arkansas. I recommend people do a workaround. Like when I was there, like here I did bowling ball in Utah, but I wasn't going to do War Loop, so there you go. It is what it is.
I mean, it makes sense because, like I said, some people will just follow one track. They'll like, hey, I'm going to do the Utah backcountry discovery route, or I'm going to do the TransAmerica Trail. But sounds like you were piecing things together and sort of editing as you were going along. But man, that's, I guess, part of the adventure, in quotes, perhaps, is that sometimes you, as you even said in your first story in our November issue, you're like, sometimes you don't know you're in over your head until you're in over your head. And then, especially if you are going down a hill, whether it's a mud fest like you were in Mississippi, or maybe one of these places in the LaSalle Mountains in Utah, it's like once you're starting to go downhill, you often can't, your option is not to turn around and go back up the way you came, because that's even harder. So you're kind of committed to a particular direction. So yeah.
Yes. And on the idea of stitching together maps is, the way I look at it is, all of these are just arbitrary lines, and it's artificial thing. And then there's the world out there. And then also is, I've had a couple of the Sam maps because I had ordered one before when I was playing, because I've been thinking and fantasizing this trip for a while. And that's another one. Not only should you all check online or whatever for the latest, is make sure you got the latest version of the map.
Yeah.
Because Sam, I don't know if Kevin and BC, they changed their routes over for the very reasons that I'm saying.
Sure. Yeah.
New roads. And then moreover is, only Lewis and Clark were Lewis and Clark. By definition, if it's on a map or on a website, means someone else has gone there before. So it's not like you have to. And so to me was what I always called the spirit of the tat, was I was trying to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean was as much dirt as I could.
Right.
So if there was an option between 3 maps and one was a gnarly road, but the rest were pavement, chances are I would take the gnarly one and just suck it up, because I'm trying to get across America on a dirt bike. I've done it on a street bike and it's awesome, and driving cross country, taking a train across countries. I've done that and that's really neat also. But on this case, it was all about, so I called it the spirit of the tat.
Right.
Which one matched, the most spirit of the tat, and that's usually what I went for in my.
So you went, you restarted in Colorado, then you rode through a lot of Utah, and then you ended up, like, did you say that you got into part of Idaho and then you entered?
Yeah, Wyoming. Actually, let's go to that part. So right at the same horrible day as like bowling ball culvert or whatever, is both of us ended up having a bad day. Nathan had something. Also, too, was, it'll be easy for him and just follow the tat. There's parts where the tat goes, and it's kind of hard to get to by a car, and so that was a bad day for him, where he had a couple of 100 miles towing that trailer, and he left his wallet at the gas station and had to go back. I mean, stuff that we all do, but like, and then so it was almost dark when I came, and it was one of the highest points. Again, we were at like 10,000 feet again. I thought all that was done in Colorado. And that night was literally freezing. It was like 28 degrees or something in the morning. But anyway, and I couldn't find him at our comms. He said he was at this campground, but he wasn't, because there was no one there. And it turns out there was like 3 campgrounds all under the same name, but they had different like cul-de-sacs and turnouts. So when I was tired and it was over and it was getting dark, and we had these comms, and he said he was there and he wasn't, and there was no sight and blah, blah. And then when I got there, and here I was talking about spoiled rat steaks, there was nothing. Just the tent was popped up, and he was like curled up in his sleeping bag and like wasn't going to move for shit. So I ate an MRE, and I was like, motherfucker, And then the next morning was freezing, and then, and it was pea soup fog. But it was, oh my God, it's that Lake District. I've never been there in my life. I'm going to go back on a street. I'll never, ever go back on a dirt bike, but I might come with like hiking with a llama or something like that, because it's some of the most beautiful, I'll call it. It's up there, top 5 of just physical. I've been to the Azores, I've been Kilimanjaro, just different places, but it's that Lake District of upper northeastern, then the panhandle of that whole strip is just amazingly hard to describe. And again, I'm like the only one there. And I remember kind of like a dream. And it goes into Wyoming, and then goes back into Utah, and then goes back into Wyoming, all the way to the very top. And in the upper northeastern corner of the panhandle is this amazing Bear Lake. It's this huge, and it's a weird color. It's like a turquoise, kind of a green blue thing. And it's just stark, because the countryside is kind of stark, and you come up over this ridge and there it is. So that's where we ended up meeting up after the ill-fated camping thing when he was in. And then I figured we had out, because for about 5 solid days we were like at 8 to 12,000 feet, like every day, and constantly. I mean, that's where we lived, and it was getting to me. I was exhausted, frankly, and I thought that he had altitude sickness was what it was. And so we camped there at Bear Lake. We kind of spent the weekend there. Like we got there in the late afternoon. I got there, and then we spent like 2 days just chilling. And literally that second day, that first full day at Bear Lake, we both slept like all day. We slept like a cat. I probably slept 18 hours. It was awesome too. And it was pretty windy though, but we were on the Eastern Shore, and there was nobody. This whole campground with not even a custodian. We're the only human beings. And I thought about Jim Bridger and all those, mountain men. They have these like little Mardi Gras parties. All the French trappers and everyone was there. And then from there is where the real Oregon Trail and the Mormon Trail and stuff, it split from the Mormon Trail and became its own Oregon Trail. And so that's kind of got me ideas, I'm going to sort of follow that. And so, so from there, it was also interesting. So now I'm on a different map system, and it turns out that BCDR, it's relatively new, has this little spur that connects to their Idaho route, and it was perfect. I picked it up exactly where we were in Bear Lake, and it dropped me off right where Sam started again, where Sam's new kind of northern section. So I literally went from chip to chip, and trail to trail seamlessly without having to stitch anything gnarly together.
Nice.
And then a lot of weird shit started to happen. Like there was this one rock that's weird. It looks like kind of a head. And I sent you a picture of it or whatever. And at the time, it was a huge navigational thing for everybody, for Native Americans, for the first trappers, to the, Mormon and the Oregon Trail people and everyone. It's like this really neat. And there's some interesting graffiti that dates back for hundreds of years from Native Americans all the way up to, pioneers and stuff on this. And so rather than follow Sam's, which again went back into the Great Basin, and I had those concerns of gas and the desert thing, I bushwhacked a little bit. So for about 50 miles, because when I was physically there, I was like, okay, I can see that, like in Oklahoma, it's easier to bushwhack where there's lots of kind of farm roads and dirt roads, but still dirt. And I went to this 3-mile crossing of the Snake River, and there's a national or state park right there. And then the state of Idaho has its own. It's called the Oregon Trail Parkway or something like that. And it's dirt. They have it's like 120 miles trail system that literally is the ruts. It follows through the prairie of these. So I left Tat and BCDR and everyone, and I kind of deviated a little bit. And I took that Mormon Trail, and boy, that to me also was one of the high points. Because again, the whole time I was the only human being out there. And the weather was excellent, and the bike was running good. And then it wasn't like life or death. I was kind of getting PTSD, like I said on that. Yeah. Every single day, several times a day, the feeling that I could literally die. It might be interesting to do and survive once, but like that's not a way of life.
Sure, it's exhausting.
I went to war. I've been in 5 wars, dude. Like I'm done with that shit. I don't ever want to do those things again. I'm not interested in dying. I'm interested in living and loving.
Yeah.
So that Mormon Trail was great. I mean, the Oregon Trail was great because I could relax. It was beautiful. It was well laid out. It was blah. But meanwhile, over in Nathan Jeep land, that poor guy, he never really bounced back. Fair enough. We were still at like 4,000 feet, 3,500 feet. I mean, it's the West, and it's that massif plateau. Like all of Idaho, I don't think the lowest spot is below 1,000 feet, or it might be. I don't know. Like even if it's flat desert plains looking stuff, And then we were outside of Twin Falls, and so we left the trailer. We just both went in the Jeep, and I, parked the bike, and we went into town to get some like Mexican food, and then see those falls, Shoshone Falls or whatever they're called. And it's super spectacular. You think, oh, it's a city that has falls. Oh my God, it's up there, man. I mean, Niagara Falls, the Yellowstone one. I mean, that's every human being should go to Twin Falls and see that. And it's neat. You can walk around and and it has the jump of where Evel Knievel tried to, remember that he tried to jump Snake River Canyon or whatever. Yeah. So in the same little hike, you can see some of the falls and then see the little ramp that's still there. And you think, God, there's no way he would have made that thing. But so that was as a motor, because when I was a kid, man, I grew up with that, I was like 2nd, 3rd grade, I had all the Evel Knievel toys. I was totally into Evel Knievel. So that was pretty neat. But anyway, so driving into town, I mean, after all the gnarly, we're most of the way through. And one of the U-joints underneath the Jeep, like finally snapped, and it broke the crankcase of my transmission case of the Jeep. Ugh. Right on the bridge, like right where there's this gnarly, it's like a major bridge, and we just, thank God, like 100 yards right after the bridge. I was like, can you imagine that would happen on that? That bridge is like 500 feet up in this canyon. But fortunately, there was some kind of like Amco or something that literally was like 3 blocks away. Like we could just push the car in neutral, kind of rattling in it, and it wasn't even a thing. So again, horrible that it happened, but thank God, like it could have happened in the middle of the desert. I mean, it could have happened by himself, and with those stupid little Garmin things and trying to find him and me, and so it happened. But so then we fixed that, And then meanwhile, I have cousins in this place called Melba. That's it. And that part of Sam's kind of, he kind of dumps you in this one part that's really pretty, actually kind of where my cousins live. And then he takes you through and Boise is sprawling. It's kind of like a East LA, kind of Ontario, Pomona, San Bernardino, you know, where it's not really city. It's like little farms, but like tract houses and for like 100 square miles. And so on Sam's and all the little routes, you're kind of stuck in this little Boise basins. But in my case, my cousins lived over there by the Hawaii mountains in Melbourne, in the real south. And so it was just keep everything together, like keep my buddy together who was falling apart. My Jeep was full. Oh, because after we got it fixed and we just hit the road again, this PCM, this, you know, proto-Neanderthal, Neolithic computer from GM, just like Garmin, instead of just buying Toshiba or Sony or somebody's electronical system. At the time, Chrysler Daimler decided, oh no, we're going to make our little proprietary 2006 crap. And then now it's been bought by Fiat or somebody else and nobody services it. So this little, the only like electronic-y part of my Jeep took a dump, and then like there's nothing you can do. So the Jeep drove perfectly, but I had no gauges. It was like no fuel gauge, no speedometer, no turn signals. You're just like, oh shit. So it's just keep everything together till I get to my cousin Calvin's. You know, literally it was just like, just make it to somewhere. And then, so we got there, and then that first day, again, Nathan just went to bed and couldn't get up. So I was like, by this first, and then of course my cousins, they're big hunters, and his son is actually a professional hunting guide. And so we had, if you ever have antelope steaks, you know, I always thought that was going to be gamey. And one of my favorite things is venison. But I tell you what, these antelope medallions, these little loins, and it was really grateful because they didn't have a lot of them, but it was a big treat. I haven't seen them in years and all of that. And so we put on a big spread. They had barbecue and, you know, played guitar and talked through the night. And Nathan wasn't having it, man. He was in his room bundled up. And so the next day, we're like, dude, I'm taking your ass to urgent care or whatever, because this isn't natural. And he's a younger guy, you know, and turns out he had Lyme disease, man. You know, that you get by being bit by a tick.
Yeah. That's,
and I felt really bad because that's a horrible fucking thing. And I'm kicking his ass and calling him a pussy, And it turns out that he was really hurt, you know, and I felt, of course, horrible. Oh, and then here's another thing is that, you know, the last trip, and I talk a lot about it in the article, was all those 5 named storms that were hitting home. Well, right about the time that I was going through Bowling Ball Alley was Hurricane Ida. You know, to this day, it's listed as the 6th greatest storm ever to hit in the history of measuring these things, the American continent. And it's 6 only behind Katrina. That was number 5. That was a big ass storm. It was a class 4 hurricane. That's 150 mile an hour sustained winds. I mean, that's a holy shit storm. And of course, they hit right at New Orleans and right where my house is by the water. And I heard that it was coming right when we went up to the high country. So for 3 solid days, I didn't have any comms.
No, you're wondering what the heck is going on. Yeah.
And then when we got down to Big Bear Lake and I could turn on my phone, I was thinking, it's already happened. So whatever happened, do I need to know about it or not? You know what I mean? And it was weird to think that like every single thing I own could be right here with me right now. Like this could be everything I own. And then I thought, well, it's my Jeep, my trailer, and my motorcycle, so I'm actually doing pretty good. So I thought, okay, you know, I clicked on the phone to see if I had a slab or a house.
Yeah, just become a nomad. So, okay.
I just thought this could be a way of life. That literally, you're right. This could be what I'm doing now. You know, it's a weird, and I felt okay with it actually. And so then I was like, okay. And then
what happened with Nathan? What happened? Let's go back to Nathan. What happened to Nathan?
Yeah. So the reason why I mentioned that was so I was like, shit. I mean, you know, okay, it's fun and blah blah blah. And that hurricane was real. And that kind of also mentioned that. It's like, you know, should I go home? Should I keep doing it? Like, this is real stuff. And these are real people. And he's a super good dude. So I medevaced his butt. I bought him an air ticket. And later on, I UPS some of his, you know, camping stuff that he had brought and all of that. And I ended up taking it with me to New Orleans and then cleaning it and, you know, sorting what was his and what was mine, because all of our stuff was commingled, tools and all that stuff. But the reason why I mentioned Ida was because that stupid, crazy freak storm, and I think why it's listed so high, stayed a storm as it ripped all the way across America. It went up over the Allegheny chain of the Appalachians and bitch slapped Pittsburgh and Philadelphia up the backside of the head. Have you? I mean, you used to live in
Yeah,
Philly.
no, yeah.
Have you ever heard of a hurricane in Philadelphia? Absolutely
No.
not. And coming from the west, I mean, no one ever heard that. If you were to get a hurricane, sometimes they hit the Jersey Shore. That was that one terrible storm that might have reached into Pennsylvania and those northern counties. But it was a class 1 hurricane. That's like what, 90-mile-an-hour sustained winds.
Something like that.
And it came from the west.
Yeah.
And where my buddy lives is in Germantown, and that's what just got its ass kicked because it's in that little ravine, that beautiful Schuylkill River and all of that.
Yeah.
And he lives in this little garden apartment, which is a almost basement. And so I heard from him later on, he texted me, is that when his buddy picked him up and he was all tired and broken and sick, is he didn't go straight home because they had to evacuate his apartment because it was under the water.
Jesus. Poor guy. Poor guy.
He got bit by a tick and got this lifetime disease for which there's no cure. And he came home with storm damage from a Louisiana storm. I felt responsible for all that.
Man, it's like a curse. So after having a support crew, a one-man support crew, you're back. So where were your cousins? Where did you fly him home? Where are you basically back on your own?
Greater Boise in the sort of central western part of Idaho. And I was there for about 10 days. It took me to first day was there, and then he was sick, and then we had to deal with that and then get a plane. And so that was a couple days. And then I tried to sort out my Jeep, and that took a while because, it was a weird thing. And most mechanics kind of didn't want to deal with it. Everyone knew what the problem was, but you can make more money changing oil. And of course, because of the COVID, everyone was shortchanged and didn't have enough people, and parts were, mail order, all that stuff. And it took a while. And in the meantime, my cousins are awesome. They live in a really cool place. And, I've been on the road. And so I was there for a little bit, like I said, probably about 10 days or something, longer than I needed to be. But sorting out all my shit. And then I also had to rethink the trip. You're absolutely right. I had to and I had to repack and figure out what I bring and didn't bring. Now I'd already done it from the original tap from Cape Hatteras.
So I had gotten used to riding a light bike where you didn't have to carry all your shit. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly right. And so I kind of made the combat decision that I would bring my little sort of tent hammock because it packs pretty small in case something happened. But I called it and said, you know what? I'm not going to camp. I'm going to stay because it's only I figured it was 3 to 5 days across Oregon to finish the task.
That's basically the last state. You just basically had to cross into Oregon and then head for the coast. Yep.
Yeah. From central eastern Oregon, and it goes slightly west-southwest, but it's mostly just due west. And I'm already kind of in the northern part, and I'm just kind of going diagonally south. So, I said, damn it, I'm finishing this. And by then, I was in better tap shape. I'd already done the bowling ball out.
Sure. Yeah.
And, my leg I figured out a weird way, because that was the other one. When the bike was loaded, I still had a little bit of mobility issues where I couldn't swing my leg.
Right. Yeah.
I had to sort of get up and step up through it. So I figured out a way where anytime I stopped for gas or at a little restaurant, I'd go around the corner of the building and then put my, I had big aftermarket metal brush guards, over my handlebar things. And I could just cram that brush guard on the side of a telephone pole, or if no one was looking in the back parking lot of Walmart, somebody's big F-250 or some shit, on a tailgate. And then I had to, so I could stabilize the bike, and then I would have to stand up over it, and so then it kind of made me worry that God, if I fell in Oregon, I'm fucked, because I would be able to, I'd be fine, but I could pick up my bike, but I couldn't get on the damn thing.
Right.
Around. So that was kind of the back of my mind, but it never came to pass, and so I'm fine. And also, we had talked about the bladder and all that. Here's another kind of stupid, funny story. So from Melba, where my cousins live, to this place called Farewell Bend, which also beautifully ended my little Oregon Trail. Because at that moment, the shallowest part to cross again the Snake River for all the pioneers to get into where the whole reason why they left St. Louis or whatever was to go to the beautiful Oregon parts. And then they went north, south, they just scattered. So the very end of Oregon Trail is right there, and they call it Farewell Bend. All those people that traveled together are now going off in different directions. And now they're competitors. They're all going to try to get new land and mining claims or doing whatever they were going to do. And so I camped there, and it was a little bit early to camp, but I kind of wanted to have that experience and that campground and all of that. And also another funny little thing is that about 5 miles in this little sliver by the river, there's this like unincorporated community or something that, because Oregon legalized recreational weed, but Oregon is one of these states where the population centers, which is like Eugene, Portland, is like 2/3 of the state population, and they're all super left. But 2/3 of the land mass of the state are like all MAGA rancher people, So it's and so all of that part is real conservative ranchers and Native Americans and stuff. And the weed thing is kind of like Texas and Tennessee is for liquor. There's like dry counties and wet counties. Right. And so all of those places are totally Christian, and they totally are not about that, except for this little sliver by the river that's somehow unincorporated. And it reminds me of those like Native American casino places. So there's nothing out there. And there's this little town that has probably 100 people. And there's like 5 weed dispensaries in this place. And there's all these license plates from like Utah and Idaho and stuff. So all the college kids drive into bumfuck Oregon because it's like the first place, I guess you can get in it. So it's kind of a funny, weird parentheses to my little Oregon Trail. It was like this whole little subculture in this thing. But anyway, so leaving there, it wasn't the promised land as everyone thought. Is that there's the last little chunk of the Great Basin. So taking the BCDR route and taking all these circuitous ways to avoid crossing this big open desert, at the end, there was still a piece of it that I had to swallow. And at the time, I thought, well, I got my boy Nathan, and there was a part in Utah that was a long distance, but Nathan literally met me with a gas can, and he was waiting underneath a freeway overpass or something. And I came there, and he filled me up, and that was, I was thinking, God, I wouldn't know how I would have done that without him. And so I thought we'd do the same in Oregon, because there was this road that went by, and he could just wait for me on the highway. But I was by myself. So I filled up that bladder. And I strapped it on the bike. It's kind of hard to strap on because it's this jiggly, like hold a kidney or something, And then so I crossed the Great Basin, and I was like, wow, I'm getting pretty good mileage on this thing. And because that's the other thing, it's hard to say like what my mileage was. I was probably getting 50 to 60 miles a gallon, but how much mileage, and you're in first gear for 4 hours, you know what I mean? With the clutch, like it's distance rather, it's hard to. So, but in this case, I've driven the most from Cape Hatteras all the way to that point without refueling was on that day. I went insane amounts of miles without ever having to put So then finally it started to sputter, and I'd never run out of gas on that bike. So I never knew really what it was felt like. So it was an interesting thing for me. I was actually comfortable with it because by then I was in the pines. I'd left the desert and is in the pines. And there was no possibility of, there's one place that I could have pulled off and left the trail and came back. But in this case, I thought, no, this little gallon was good for at least 40, if not up to 60 to 70 miles. So, and that's all I'm going to do for the rest of the day. So I felt fine. I was going to run it till it crapped out just to see what that was and what miles I got out of it. So that happened right when I hit this blacktop finally, that was kind of going into town where I was going to get a motel. So I was like, oh, wow. And so it was a pretty steep, nice paved. So I pulled in the clutch, put it neutral. And I never ran out of gas because I just coasted, and there was a gas station in this town, and I literally coasted in the gas station. So when I got off the bike to fill it up, I looked over and that bladder had shifted under the little bungee cords or whatever, and somehow had touched the muffler and melted the fucking. Why didn't I just engulf in flames? I mean, I had a gallon or 2 gallon gas thing that melted on my muffler. And why didn't I set the whole forest ablaze behind me? I mean, and why didn't I or if none of those things happened, why did my bike wait to crap out when I was already going downhill on a beautiful paved road into town? Like, what if I crapped out 5 minutes, or it made a navigational error and crapped out in the middle of the forest somewhere? Like, it was one of those, like, oh, the enormity of it. And also the false bravado. I said, oh, I can keep going. I don't need to pull off here for gas. I'm good. I have the spare on there. I never had that spare. So it was a weird feeling. I was like, God, thank you, God. I mean, wow. So that was it. The big Great Basin. And so when the Great Basin was finished, I had about 3 more days left. And also, arguably, That was the single. I tell people, if you do have one of those big Winnebago bikes, or you are unsure of your skills, or if you are infirm and you had some medical issues or whatever, and you can only do a little part of the TAT. I'd mentioned Arkansas and the Ozarks, although some of the roads there are more challenging. But if you could do Oregon, or even that half of Oregon, was just magnificent. That's a part of the TAT. I'd say I'll never ride a dirt bike again. But if you wanted to give me one of your Triumph Tiger test bikes to see if it was any good or not, I'd take it and say thank you, and I'd probably do that route again, because it's really neat. Oregon, I mean, here's a state that puts a Douglas fir on their license plate, man. Those are people that know how to run a state park and a state campground, and they care about their that is really just well organized, good markings, but not obtrusive to the wilderness experience. I mean, really well thought out. I mean, cheers to you, Oregon, and your state park system and natural resource husbandry. And they've actually paved a lot of their roads, but in a very cool way. They're little one lane, like almost single track, like bike paths that go for hundreds of miles. And there's a huge network of these really cool, like, bicycle paths through the wilderness. Nice. And having come from Bowling Ball Alley and Cross the Great Basin and all that,
I'm sure that was a relief. Yeah, well, because I mean, at some point, like, you've had the challenge, now you just want to finish, so having things a little bit easier towards the end is, I know any trip I've done, it makes it a relief. So all right, so it's been more than a year prior to this, you riding across Oregon. You had ridden your KTM on the Pacific, on the Atlantic, basically on the beach in the Atlantic Ocean. So what was it like to get to the very end of this trip? I mean, you basically going across Oregon and you make it to the Pacific Ocean. Did you actually get to ride on the beach in the Pacific?
Yes. But I'm sorry if I could go a little bit longer on the one last. So everything was made in the shade. And on the one hand, you're right. I just wanted to finish it. But on the other hand is like a really good book, that you've just been reading the hell out of all day. I didn't want to finish it. I was going page by page because the weather was great. It was so beautiful that despite the Jeep breaking and Nathan leaving and all that, like, I can make it. I did it. I'm fine. And it was so great. But at that time, and it's every year, but especially the last 2 years, the poor people of the West, and the poor Oregonians especially, is those wildfires. I mean, raging, million acre, you can see the smoke from space. People are wearing face masks in Portland kind of shit, like just terrifically horrible fires. And I've been watching, just like I was watching the hurricane, once we got to Idaho, we were watching those wildfires because they were all burning from end to end where the TAT was going in central and western Oregon. Like, about a third of the TAT was in these zones that was being closed off and having aircraft dump, orange crap on them, like, wow. So now what am I going to do? And I detail a little bit in the story, but that was a trick. And sure, I could have gotten on Route 80, I think it is, or whatever, 40. And in 3 hours, I would have finished the TAT. You know what I mean? But the spirit of the TAT was, I'm trying to get there by my dirt bike. And a big swath of Oregon was suddenly off limits. And so that took a little bit of finessing. And then, and so I kind of talked about more in the story, but I was fine. And I had to cross the Cascades. And that was the other one. You can't really go around the Cascades. You got to go through them. But all the areas that I would have gone through them, except for a couple of paved roads, freeways that the government had kept alive from the fire, for interstate transit or whatever, were all closed off. Even if they weren't on fire, they were closing it because shit was so dry. And it was really windy, and these fires were jumping hundreds of miles and spreading, So under escort of a sheriff and a couple of other people at the campground that I caught him, I went through the smoldering area and got to the other side. And then I was in the staging area of all these firefighters from all kinds of states and National Guard. And it was interesting. And it was kind of chaotic, but like a military operation, and it was all going on. And then from there, I talked to this kid at a gas station, and who was I saw a dirt bike in this thing, and I walked in. It was the kid that was pumping the gas at the gas station. It was his bike, and so I was like, oh, perfect. And so he was pretty knowledgeable in the trails, and so, but he was telling me, he's like, I said, so how do I get out of here on a dirt road and go where I'm going? And so we're talking about it, but he says, but you know what, dude? He's like, you got it. He says, make sure you fill up here and you make sure you have, there's no gas or no services and no towns. And this whole chunk that I was going to drive through. But he says, the problem now is that all the critters from these mountains are getting burned out, are coming down to the lowlands. And he says, even around here, but especially out where you're going, he says there's like record numbers of bear, and they're all hungry and they're all scared. And because it was in September, I guess it was, this is when they're all having their babies before they go hibernate. You know, they're getting their cubs kind of done. So he says, you don't want to stop for shit. You know, like there's cougars and bears, and they're all hungry and pissed, and they hate you. And so that was kind of, I never even saw, I saw a bear later on the last day, but that was kind of a weird thing. And of course, when you're riding like that, you're like, God, was that tick, tick, tick happening in my engine? What was that sound? What do I have a flat? You know, like I was really, and then because navigation, because I'm totally off piste now. I'm off Sam's trail. I'm off every trail. I'm 100 miles from where I need to be, and I'm trying to do this by dirt roads. So there's a lot of navigational stops. And again, the whole time where I'm stopped and squinting at this friggin' Garmin and trying to plug in little things, I hear twigs snapping or a little sound. You know, like, it's kind of like being in a combat zone. You know, you're like super fucking frosty about what's going on around you. So that was like another piece of the tat. Anyway, at the very end, here's another little piece to finally get to the water, and then we'll finish the conversation. Is that so? On the whole trip, I got one flat tire in Tennessee. We didn't really talk about it because it's a sub story. It's interesting. I could, but time and space and all that. So later on in Trinidad that we talked about was where typically people swap out their tires. The tire thing, I thought I could change a tire and all that, but here's another thing. It's like we can all sit at the bar on some website, and talk about stuff. But when it's really you, really there, really doing it, it's different, man. And so I had the tubes, I had the spanners, I had a little video saved on my phone of some 16-year-old girl that like field strips her KTM and puts it back together in 15 minutes, but then when it was me in Tennessee, and I'm sitting there with this flat tire, and I took off all my shit, and I found a rock and leaned the bike over, and I started to do it, and I thought, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to completely fuck up my bike. I'm going to put a hole in the tube that I changed, and it was like, and so at the end, I kind of wimped out, I ended up found a guy, and he told me and I'd help and all of that. So it made me think that I can't be pulling this shit in Utah, man. I didn't know about Bowling Ball Alley yet, but I just thought I could perceive there would be things like Bowling Ball Alley. And I thought, I've got that this could be a problem. Like traveling alone as I am, going to harder remote places, I either learn how to change a tire or come up with some solution. And I'm too dumb to learn how to change tire right. And if anyone's listening to this, they're probably going to scoff at me, but it's real. I mean, I had the stuff. I looked at it. I thought I kept all the spanners because I thought, well, again, maybe I could trade like beer for work or something. Like if I was in a place, the guy said I could help you, but I don't have the tools. I'd just like, I have the tools, So anyway, so when I was in Trinidad, I swapped out and then that's another one. God, they call them bib moves. So there's another name for them, but they're basically these concentrated foam rubber and this like liquid like talcum powder, and so they're puncture proof tires basically, but like a lot of things, they're a compromise, and one of the compromises is you can't go above like 60 miles an hour or they get too hot and they blow up. I mean, literally they explode off your rim or stuff. And also there's a shelf life to them that's a lot less than a pneumatic tire. And so my compromise was I just put I'll do half and half, so I'd reduce my risk in half, I thought. So I'd keep a typical pneumatic tire on the back because that's where the friction and the speed was. But on my front tire, I'd put one of these bib moves. And also I had read anecdotally, if those sort of go flat, you could still kind of maneuver your bike. But if your back goes flat, the chain would pull the tread off the rim. Hello?
Hello? Yeah.
Yeah. I've been talking for a while. And I wasn't. This is about the point at the end of the conversation where the last two times I was talking to the cat and you were like taking a shower and going to work.
I'm ready for you to wrap it up.
Yeah. So So anyway, the only reason why I bring all this up now is, again, almost like the little gas thing. On the last day of the tat, it was, again, beautiful weather and everything. And again, I talk about in the book is that instead of going straight to the Tat, I did this little excursion because there was a little ghost town and it was the last day and I didn't want to let go. And it was so beautiful. And I was kind of like, after I finished, okay. And so, but I kind of dicked around too much. And then when I finally got back on the real Tat and I had about 60 miles to go. So it's a couple of hours still, and through the Siskiyous, one last little mountain where you think you're there, and you can, on the map, you can actually see blue at the edge of the margins, but you're still committed to this trail, and it goes, and God, it was a circuitous route that go down to the Rogue River and then all the way up to the tree line and then back down. It followed like every saddle and shoulder of the terrain. I guess it was an old wagon road or something, but God, it was brutal. You're almost there. And it just, the next turn is another valley, and you go up to the top of the mountain and you look out and you can't even see the ocean. You just see more valleys, and you're like, Jesus, I mean, this is the longest 60 miles I ever had. And in particular, it was long because by then the rigidity of that foam rubber that had lasted me from Trinidad, which is the southeastern corner of Colorado. And so I've gone basically 3/4 of the length of Colorado, top to bottom of all of Utah, a corner of Wyoming, east to west, all the way across on the fat end of Idaho. And now, 3/4 of the way, 4/5 of the way, all the way from end to end of Oregon on this front tire. And again, through Bowling Ball Alley and bouncing through it, is my tire wasn't getting squishy. By the end, it was flat. I was riding on those rims and probably fucking up my rim head doing it. But at this point, I probably had 15 miles or something, 20 miles. I got to do this. And so that was enough. So then to now really, really get to the beach part. So when and that's the other one is extreme. So at the little inn bed and breakfast I stayed, which is super cute. And it's like it was an old stage. The original one was from the 1850s. And then it burned down in 1888. And then, so this inn is totally barely remodeled from like 1888, and the wooden floorboards. It's really cute. It's been a stage stop since the gold rush. And it's the oldest continuously operating business in the Pacific Northwest. That it was built as a hotel in 1888, and it's remained a tavern and hotel even through Prohibition and all of that. So it's really, really neat. And so that was the last place I stayed in. It was cute. But because of COVID and all that, instead of one of these big spread breakfasts that these places usually put on, they gave you one of these peachy little paper bags that had like a fucking apple or banana, like a power bar, and like a cinnamon roll or something from 7-Eleven, and you're like, in a little juice box or something, that was the breakfast. So, and then because I dicked around that morning through the afternoon and I needed to get going, I was really hungry. And so in my tank bag, I had one little power bar. And as soon as I saw this little sign that said something about the ocean, I thought, oh, I'm almost there. So to celebrate the next little vista that I see, and the first time I see the ocean, that'll be the first time I saw the ocean like that year, because I started in Colorado, like the first time I see the ocean, I'm going to stop, shut off the engine, and have a little Powerball picnic and like relish the moment, and then come down the mountain and finish the Tat. Well, it never happened. I was really hungry. It's like 4:30 in the afternoon. And it's like, what the fuck? I go all the way up and see this vista, and I'd see more mountains and more forests. I mean, what the hell, And then I come down the mountain, and then the other thing too is when I said, oh, if you ever give me that Triumph Tiger and I run that route again, is the nice thing about that final Oregon stretch is it was literally like the greatest hits package of the entire Tat from Cape Hatteras. I'm serious. The Rogue River looked exactly like North Carolina. Those ferns and those deciduous trees, and it was kind of humid down there, and all of North Carolina had streams next to the roads. All those roads would go down into these little hollows and stuff. And so it looked exactly like that. And then climbing out of it was like pines and western. And then there was parts at the top of the Siskiyous that was chaparral and scree that was very much like Utah. And then a couple of weird little dried microclimates that were like south facing, that were kind of manzanita and desert. But then there was these defilades that had these there's a typical pine, there's redwoods, and there's another pine that's from that area, and they had like moss on them that was really Pacific Northwest. And so it was, and it's short, I'm talking like 15 miles. It was just these the terrain kept changing, and it was, like I said, it was just the greatest hits of all the most waterfalls on the side of the road, and animals. I saw bear. There was a herd of elk. The only elk I saw, I saw one single elk in Arkansas of all places, but there was a herd of elk. That's a big animal. Boy, that made me pull in the clutch and like let them cross, because boy, you get hit by one of those, or I didn't realize how really big elk were, but impressive animal, just impressive, like a Clydesdale, like one of those Budweiser beer horse things. I mean, a big animal, bear, a neat. So anyway, so I'm down there on the Rogue River. I'm pretty hungry, waiting for a little seascape. And then on my little Garmin, it was just a single trail forever and ever and ever. So I'm not even looking at the Garmin. There's not many options, I'm just following this river. I saw this T intersection coming up, and I'm like, oh, that's a change of like terrain within 100 yards. Like, okay, here it comes, because I had it on kind of macro. And then suddenly I turned the corner in this forest, and that little was Highway 101. And then right when I came to T intersection, the map turned blank. The Garmin, because my chip was finished, that's it. The tap was over. So it was it was startling in its abruptness. Like, there it is, done. You're done. And here I'm trying to, it's like, fuck. I was kind of just like, really? No, not yet. And then you're on Highway 101. It's not a freeway right there, but it's still a big undivided like 4-laner, and then the ocean's on one side and the forest is on the other, and it's like 3 or 4 miles down to Port Orford itself, which incidentally is the westernmost part of the continental United States. And I think that's why Sam picked that. Because I always wondered, why Port Orford? Why not Port of Discovery, where Lewis and Clark ended up, or several other places? But it's because it's, like you're going from the easternmost to the westernmost, and it's kind of neat. So I arrived in Port Orford. Oh, and I had to drive like on the shoulder with people honking at me.
You got a flat front tire.
Yeah, and I'm just trying not to get mowed down by a semi, and then on the paved road, like it was a little bit forgiving on the little dirt and gravel. In fact, it was great on the gravel, having this little flat tire. But so it kind of sucked, and I was getting tired, and the freeway thing was, and I was still shocked that like the tap was over. It's really over. Is it really over? It can't be over. And then so then I get to this port, and the port is a working port. I mean, this is a seaport with working fishermen, major, crabbing and shrimping and whatever the hell they're doing. And so, and it's also weird because I've seen this in the Azores, actually, and I've seen it in Africa, but it's not a port because it's exposed, and I don't know why the hell they built it. I guess because it's the westernmost part or something. Maybe there's a lighthouse there. And so it's got these huge cranes, and they're lifting up these, and you've been here in Louisiana, these big shrimp boats, commercial liveaboard, out there for 2 weeks at a time. And they're lifting them up in these nets and putting them up on top of the docks into these like dolly things. It's really interesting. I said the ones in Europe and Africa were smaller scale, but I've never seen this big, like pulling ships out of the water and setting them on top of the dock. It was the end of the day. And so the boats were, it was a work day, during the week or whatever. And so people were coming in with their catch. And so that was interesting in and of itself, irrespective of the last minute of the tat. So, but it was confusing because having been on the internet like everybody and read all the shit about the tat, was this all the pictures of everyone on the beach. I'm like, where the hell is the beach? There's not a sign for that, and it's this kind of industrial port. So I'm like, huh. And I got a flat tire, and I'm tired. It's getting to be dark. I don't want to dick around, run around this fucking beach, but I did. I mean, I had to do it. Me, I'm ADHD completist guy. Got to be on the beach. I got to dip the tire in. Got to happen. And since I dipped not the same tire, but at least the same rim was dipped in the Atlantic, and I took the picture. So damn it, I got it. It's not over until it's over. So I did. I found a little kind of a footpathy thing through like the ice plants that kind of went down this sand, typical West Coast looking, all the way down to California. And then the beach is like kind of down below. And so I went down there, but it's at the end of the day. And so the tide was kind of coming in. So there wasn't really much of a beach there. And I was already committed because I came down there, and it was windy. God, I said, from the minute I came out of the Rogue River, I almost got blasted out. It was extremely windy that day. And so it was like, wow. So I'm sitting there perpendicular to the wind, like a big sail, and like with my boot trying to plant it outward like a giraffe trying to drink. My legs are splayed to try to keep from blowing over because all my luggage, I'm like a big sail. And I'm trying to take my gloves off because the phones don't work with gloves on, so like the little touch screens, and try not to drop my gloves because, like I said, getting off the bike and getting back on the bike. I told myself, because I almost dropped the glove, it fell on the tank and I was able to pick it up, because I thought, you know what, if I drop this glove, I'm leaving it on the beach, $40 or not, because I can't get back on the motorcycle because I told you I've got a cripple and I don't have the mobility to swing my
Yeah, you
leg.
can't put a kickstand down in the sand. So
Yeah, and my
so,
my feet were starting to sink
so,
in, and then the tide was coming in, and the tide, I saw the tide coming in when I was kind of coming down there, but it was coming in really fast. I mean, as long as it took me to tell this, and then dick around trying to ride the bike, and then trying to get the background so you could see the sea and not just my shoulder and all that shit. And then and my boots were sinking, and then the tide was coming in. So by the end, I was actually in the ocean. Like I'm like about 6 inches, but almost middle of the calf because it's sinking in. And then where the ocean comes, that sand that was hard now is like undermining, and my wheel was getting to be covered. And so it was I thought, you know what? I made the entire tat only to lose my bike to the ocean at the end.
Well, all right. So
you
you finally put your bike wheels in the Pacific Ocean after doing it in the Atlantic Ocean more than a year earlier. So that was a hell of an adventure. I know that we've got the first part of your story in our November issue. We'll have the part 2, which you've sent me, and I've got photos in a upcoming issue in January 2023. Hey man, I hate to wrap it up, but I have got to go. It is Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and I'm on deadline for our January issue. So thank you for sharing your story, both in written form and in these 3 podcast episodes. I've got to go, man. Sorry.
Love you.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. And for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstead. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down.
If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.